This is Join Us in France, episode 252. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and Join Us in France is a podcast where you'll hear pragmatic advice for your next trip to France. Hopefully you'll get inspired to go beyond Paris and enjoy the rest of France too. And what do you know? On today's episode, Elyse tells me the story of her scenic drive along the Loire River between Angers and Saumur. One of her stops was at the Fontevraud Abbey, where Eleanor of Aquitaine and her son Richard the Lionheart are buried. I spent a few hours myself at Fontevraud and really enjoy it, and we explain why in this episode. We talk about why this is also a great itinerary for cycling, although in that case you'd probably have to stop somewhere for the night, but there's no lack of great villages to choose from, and we talk about a few of them. Or you could stay in a Troglodyte house, which they also have in this area. Not so sure about those, but they would be worth a stop for sure. To be clear, our emphasis today is not on the Loire Valley Chateaux, but on the Loire River and the beautiful towns and cities you will encounter as you explore this area. This drive would take a whole day because, as we'll see, there are a lot of places that are worth a stop. And you could also do it in either direction. She did it going east, but you could do it going west. Now, please note that there is no public transportation to do this. You'll need either a car or hop on a bicycle. If you're interested in this episode, I recommend that you go to the front page of joinusinfrance.com and click on the Loire Valley area on the map of France. This will list all the episodes about this beautiful part of the country. And we use a lot of French names on this podcast. Sometimes I remember to spell them, sometimes I don't. So if you'd like to see how they're spelt and see them written out, go to the episode page on joinusinfrance.com/252. And now let's talk about the Loire River and its beautiful towns and villages. Bonjour, Elyse.
Bonjour, Annie.
How nice to see you.
Yeah, back from my very interesting vacation.
Yes, you had a nice vacation. I haven't had one yet, so
No.
You're ahead.
I'm ahead. I wish I could go back on vacation, to be honest. I like vacation at the very, very, very end of the summer. I've always been that way, and it's the thing you look forward to. It's like when I was teaching in New York, I would have lunch I would be the last person to have lunch. I would look forward to the lunch, If you have it too early, it's like it's over and there's no...
Yes, that's it.
That's
You're done.
it. You're done, So.
Anyway, today we're not talking about Elyse's vacation preferences.
A little bit, coming. Yeah.
We are talking about a scenic drive you took along the Loire Valley.
Exactly. In fact, this was the culminating event, basically, of my vacation this year.
So we're not going to talk about the chateaux per se today. We're mostly going to talk about this drive, taking you through different villages and towns that are interesting.
And the whole, not too much in great detail, but a little bit connected to basically the idea of what the Loire represents as a river, And I have in the past been to, I think, almost all of the chateaux. But this was something new for me to actually just do this drive.
Right.
And it was very, very lovely. And it was very, very, very pleasant. Let's put it that way. It was just very peaceful, and there was no rush of big tourists and lots of tourists and stuff like that.
Even in the height of the summer, this is not a place that attracts throngs of tourists.
No, it's the chateau, of course, that do.
Yeah, and even they don't.
I think some of them do. Some of the bigger ones, the ones that are the most famous. Yeah. But of course, part of this is that now just a couple of things, because I don't have numbers to throw out, but the Loire with an E at the end, right? Because there's also la Loire, say the la Loire. And then there's le Loire. And
that's right.
Don't ask me why there are both. And one
but
is...
le Loire doesn't have an E at the end,
It doesn't have an E, and it's a le, and it goes into the Loire with an E at the end, which is...
Donc, le Loire se verse dans la Loire.
Oui.
Okay. So le Loire empties into la Loire.
The big one, yeah.
Yes.
And there's also the Cher and the Vienne, among
other rivers.
Other important rivers, but they're not. And of course, I don't know if we've ever talked about this, but I like the fact that in French there's a word fleuve, which means a river that empties into the ocean, which we don't have in English.
I didn't know that's what it meant.
It's exactly what it means.
Parce qu'on a rivière, fleuve.
Uh-huh.
So that, un fleuve opens into the
sea.
Into the sea or the ocean.
Into the sea, exactly.
Okay. Well, you taught me some French today.
There you are.
Extra points for you.
Extra points, yeah. What's interesting, talking about words, is that in English, we have more words for little things like stream, which doesn't exist in French. They say little river.
Yeah.
You know? So it's like...
on dit ruisseau.
Yeah.
Il y a un ruisseau.
Right. I mean, it's interesting. Why the word fleuve? I love the word fleuve anyway. Okay. So La Loire is the longest fleuve in France.
Yes.
And for centuries was royal.
The river was royal?
The river, just like the forest. Which meant that anything that floated on it had to pay money.
Ah, well.
Okay. I mean, in other words, it really belonged to the kings of France.
Right. So the king could set up tolls
and they did
such.
And they did.
Okay.
And so one of the things, now this was kind of a decision we made coming back from our summer vacation, which was in the region of Brittany. Basically we got off the highways in Angers. Now, I'm not going to talk about Angers other than to say it's another one of these very beautiful old cities that are associated with the region of Anjou and the Loire Valley, with a huge castle up on top. But basically, the idea was to get along the river. We really didn't stop and visit Angers. That might be happen another time.
Right.
And there are two roads that take you along what is called the levee. I guess it's the same word as in English. We have the same word. We say levee. It's levee in French.
La levée?
Yeah.
Levee?
Yeah, okay. Exactly. And it was built in, get this, the 12th century.
Jeez. That's old.
Starting in the 12th century, that is in the 1100s, by the kings of France, when that region and from there north was France, to protect the land, because it's very rich land around there, and because the Loire is a river that floods.
Yeah.
And floods and floods and floods.
It's kind of flat, that area.
It's very flat.
Yes.
It's very flat. It's very rich, which of course is now why it's associated with wonderful white wines a lot. More than reds. I'm not sure why. There's got to be some reason in the soil why whites tend to be better there. So when you do this drive, which we did from west going east, you could do it either way, you are really driving on top of the levee. And so going east, you have the river to your right, and then these lovely villages to your left.
Okay.
And it was very strange because when we left Angers, we took these very tiny little départementales.
Which means minor
the tiny
roads.
Little back roads, to get down to the road that goes along the river. And it is, as you mentioned, it's relatively flat.
Yeah. A lot of people mention that it's a good place for people who want to cycle but don't want to kill themselves.
That's right. And we saw several small groups of people who indeed were cycling. And it is, for someone like me, it would be ideal. Really ideal.
Or if you're cycling, like yesterday I saw a family. It was obviously a French family with mom, dad, and 3 little kids.
Yeah.
And dad had on his bicycle, he had a trailer kind of thing. And mom had big hanging baskets, and the kids just had their little bikes.
Right.
But it's obvious they're going somewhere on a bike
tour.
vacation.
Right.
Yeah, and that would be pretty easy to do with kids because it's fairly flat.
It's fairly flat. Yeah, they call it, in fact, the carriole, the little wagon that they attach to the back.
Yeah,
and it's really. And also, the other reason why it's a place where even I could imagine doing that, which tells you a lot about who I am, is that it's, even though it's flat, it's not boring. Mm-hmm. And so as you go along the river, one of the things about the Loire is that it's very, very, very wide, but there's a lot of sand.
I see. And
apparently, part of the history of it, and part of the history of why they had to build the levee, is that the river carries all of this sand. It comes down from I can't remember the mountain now. My husband, if he's listening to this, would kill me. But it's somewhere in the Massif Central where all of this actually starts, somewhere in the Lozère or something like that. And for some reason that has to do with the geological aspects of it, the silt and the sand is carried by the river.
Right.
So over the centuries and centuries, there have been areas that have been basically clogged up by the sand.
I see.
Which has caused a lot of the flooding.
Right.
And so what happens is, what you see is that it looks like it's very shallow and very peaceful, and it is not. But what you do see is lots of areas that look like little baby islands that are sand with birds on them, and it's really... And then you see these vineyards at the beginning, leaving Angers. It's really flat, and then it gets more hilly as you go, and it's beautiful. Yeah, and I just thought it was really beautiful.
Yeah, I was there last summer, and I thought it was very pretty too.
It's really, really lovely.
Yeah.
So we were taking this ride, and we made a few stops.
Right.
And a couple of them were stops that were by pure chance. And then a couple of them were suggestions from people that we know. And so there are lots and lots of villages that are built along this levee. Mm-hmm. And one of the characteristics of them, until you get much further on, is that they're all very, very, very horizontal, in the sense that they're linear. So you have the village built as almost like two lines parallel to the river.
Yeah, people want to get the river view or something.
I think it had to do with what the original function of these villages were, because there are groupings of them, and then there's a lot of space where there aren't any. But most of the villages go back very far in time, and they were connected to the commerce along the river. And also, because they wanted to be protected by the levee, they kept themselves as close as possible. And my guess is it was also, in case of flooding, they could go up above, because up to the top of the levee, because it's not that high, but it actually was really for preventing destruction of the houses. And the other thing about them is that they're all built of this absolutely gorgeous, very white limestone.
Right. Yes.
And we were there on a beautiful sunny day, and it just shines, with the blue of the river and the blue of the sky. And I thought, and lots of flowers everywhere. Mm-hmm. So as you can tell, I actually really liked it a lot.
That's good.
So a couple of these little villages. The first one is called Saint-Mathurin.
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 Okay. Yeah.
I don't know why I like that name.
It's cute.
Kind of cute, huh? We stopped there. We had a little coffee and snack, nice little sort of cafe that was right across from the river. And it was very pretty. And I discovered afterwards that some of the houses there go back to the 1500s, 1600s. Relatively typical style of the Loire Valley, which is fairly low. The houses are not very, very high. But they have a very pretty aspect to them. I can't quite explain why, but I found them very, very nice.
I'll try and find a photo.
Yeah, find the photos. And this particular village, Saint-Mathurin, is famous because it was one of the first places where the workers were brought to start working on the levee.
I see.
And so it really goes back very, very far. Although from what I could see, I don't think any of the houses go back to the 1300s or anything like that, but certainly to the 1600s and 1700s, and very, very, very charming, you know, and with enough facilities that unless you have to go do your big shopping, you know, you have your post office, your little pharmacy, you have a few of those things there. So really very small, but not deserted by everything. You know?
Right.
And roses and oleander everywhere. It was just really amazing to see how much, coming from Toulouse where we have such a dry, hot summer, it was so nice to be where there's enough moisture that there are flowers.
Well, yeah, there are flowers in Toulouse too, but you have to water your plants.
Well, yeah, but here, I mean, this is not necessarily just from watering. I mean, this is not flowers in pots, you know. I mean, this is just like there's enough moisture, I guess.
Right, in general.
And in general, you know. Yeah. And so we discovered basically that this drive along the levee was really fascinating because you have a couple of bridges, which are much more recent in the history of the levee, which go across to the other side, to the southern side of the river, but the villages are all built on the northern side, at least in this part. And so they succeed one another. You have Saint-Martin, and then one that comes very close after, a few kilometers afterwards, about 7 or 8, called Les Rosiers. Les Rosiers sur Loire. And as you can guess...
The rose bushes.
Except that it turns out that the name has to do with the word roseau. Which is in English. Okay. Now, in English, it is a...
I know what it is in French. I'm not sure.
A roseau is a... Oh, boy. I knew I was going to... I said to myself, I have to look this word up, and now I'm trying to remember what the word is.
In English.
A roseau is a... Shoot, what is it in English? It's... I can see it in my...
me too.
In my brain.
I know what it is in French. I just don't know how to say that in English.
It's a kind of reed. It's a reed, but it's a
reed.
A reed, yeah.
A reed. So it's
what? It's where they put Moses, you know, in the basket.
Yeah.
What is it in English? I can't remember.
It's a reed.
It's a reed.
Yeah.
That's it. That's it, right?
So it's those kind of
with the
tall sticks
with the brown up on top,
and they're invasive.
Exactly.
They will grow. They will take over the world.
And Saint-Martin and Les Rosiers are both villages that actually were begun in the very beginning of the 1300s. And Les Rosiers was famous.
But why is it called rosier if it's full of reeds?
It's because the word was originally in Latin the word for roseau, and at some point was deformed, and then people started thinking that it was rosier and not roseau.
Okay, so it's just a bad naming.
So it's just that, you know, like a lot of times the names and the words like that, they evolve. They evolve, yeah. But both villages were famous for being places where they would load and unload the goods on the flat-bottom boats, which were called Toues, Toues.
Toues.
Or Fontevraud. I know. I knew it. When I said it, you would laugh. I just knew it, you know.
That's kind of okay. It's funny.
Though in the Dordogne, they're called gabarres.
Yeah.
But in the Loire Valley, this is their name.
C'est des quoi? Des trous?
They're flat-bottom boats.
No, the word is...
Toues.
Des Toues ou des Fontevraud?
Fontevraud.
Jeez, people.
Yeah. Well, it turns out that it's because... the language that was spoken in this area up until the beginning of the 1300s was an ancient language that used a lot more Latin. And it was starting in the 1300s that Old French started being used. And so a lot of these words changed. So a lot of them seem very strange to us now. But it was really fascinating to read that it was in the Loire Valley, which is one of the reasons why Tours is considered to be the city to go to for the purest old French, the purest French, is that this is where French started.
I see, okay.
Okay, so they were using a mix of Latin and whatever the local languages were, and then it evolved, and I'm not sure how that happens, you know, and so the langue d'oeil which of course is the term used for the language that became French, was officially recognized in the Loire Valley.
I see. Okay.
In the 1300s.
So c'est la langue d'oil. O-I-L.
O-I-L, yeah, exactly.
Langue d'oil.
Like oil, d'oil.
Yeah.
So as you drive, we go through Saint-Mathurin, and what's interesting is that...
les Rosiers-sur-Loire.
Les Rosiers-sur-Loire.
C'est pas Saint, il n'y a pas de Saint. No, c'est les Rosiers-sur-Loire.
No. They both have very pretty churches. They both have lots of flowers, and they both are built in this very linear fashion, although Les Rosiers is actually a bit bigger. And to my surprise, it's a village that has over 600 permanent residents. So it's consequent for a village, because in France you have villages that have not even 100 people. You know? But this has basically Les Rosiers even more has every kind of commerce you can imagine. I didn't see big supermarkets. I mean, I don't think it has that.
Right.
But
by now, French people, they know if they live in a rural place like that, they just go to the big town for a supermarket.
Exactly.
Maybe once a week, once every other week or whatever. And then,
And then they go. And in this case, they're kind of halfway between Angers and Saumur.
Okay.
So I guess it depends on which is easier to get to for a variety of people. So we were actually on our way to Saumur, which you have stopped at also.
Yeah.
And Saumur is, of course, very famous for its cavalry.
Sure.
For the horses.
Yes.
Which I was surprised to find out, because we drove through and we wanted to see the old historical center, is no longer there.
Oh.
So I don't know where they've gone. I don't know where they've taken the horses. But Saumur has been famous through centuries.
Yes, a cadre noir, no? Is that what it's called?
I think that's what it's called.
But I think they still have like demonstrations and...
they have shows.
Shows, yes.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's where they do the horse training.
Right. But it was surprising because, me, I'm an American. I said to Pierre, maybe they're just on vacation. And he kind of went, duh, look at these buildings. They've been abandoned,
Yeah.
And it's really a huge part of the city of Saumur. It's the part that's lower down. It's actually the part that's closer to the river. So all of the huge buildings that are actually 17th century, they're beautiful, gorgeous classical style architecture, they actually are abandoned. So I don't know where the cavalry has gone, because this is famous for the training of the horses and all of that. And yes, they still do the horse shows with the performances and everything else.
Yes, when I was there, I saw several ads for the horse shows.
But it's a royal city. So what happens is that the whole history of the Loire Valley is connected to the history of the kings of France. And the river was the property of the kings of France, which is kind of hard to imagine as a concept. But
it probably meant you couldn't fish without permission.
Right, exactly.
And you couldn't, float. No, you don't float on the river. What do? You sail on a river.
You sail on a river,
Yes.
exactly, yeah. You float if you're not in your boat, but you sail if you're in your boat, yeah.
I'm losing my English.
Your mind.
Terrible.
But you're right. It's just like the whole concept of the royal forest. I mean, a person could have been executed for cutting down a tree in a forest that was a royal forest.
Right.
And the Loire from Angers on, going east, was royal. It really belonged, everything around it and on it belonged to the royal family. Mm-hmm. So they built these cities, which is how they wound up afterwards, of course, building all these chateaux in the Renaissance. But Saumur was a royal city in the sense that it had the castle, which is up on top of the hill, which is really, really quite impressive, although I only saw it from the outside.
Yeah, I didn't go in either because I was there to pick up my puppy.
You were there to pick up your puppy.
Right. So I drove around the town and I walked around the town some, but I got there kind of late afternoon and looked around for a few hours. And by the time I was ready to go see the chateau, it was closed. So,
it was closed.
Yeah.
Right.
And then the next morning I picked up my puppy and then I wasn't going to go visit.
You weren't going to visit.
Saumur with a brand new puppy.
No, and we were actually we had other things we wanted to get to do that day. So we basically, but the outside, I took some pictures. It is, of course, very Disneyland looking.
It's very nice.
The Chateau of Saumur is absolutely magnificent. And it really is a predecessor to the other chateau that come a little bit later. And Saumur was really, it had 2 sets of walls around it. And it's still very beautiful. It's not that big. It's bigger than, it's not a village, it's a small city. But it's very, very beautiful. And of course, you're at the beginning of the part of the Loire Valley where you have hills. And so the area around it starts to have very beautiful vineyards. And so and the other thing that's typical of this part, once you start going this further, at this point going east, is that you have troglodyte houses. And so if you drive along the river, and when you go to Saumur, you cross over to the southern side of the Loire River and the valley. From there on, going east, you have endless numbers of limestone cliffs that are also craie, which is chalk. And there are all of these troglodyte houses that are still used, which is very interesting. And
like, you mean people live in them?
People really live in them, yeah. And well, one of the things, and I've seen this in the Gironde area, opposite Bordeaux too. One of the reasons people like doing this is that the temperature is the same all year round.
Yeah.
And the windows all face south, so they're on no, what am I saying? No, the windows face north. They're on the southern side of the river, and the houses are built into the cliffs. And so in the heat of the summer, they're cool. And then just like with certain caves, in the wintertime, they never get that cold either.
Yeah, but you live in a cave.
And so what happened was we were driving along as we were heading towards Saumur, and we passed a couple of these very pretty villages. And all of a sudden, I looked up and I saw that there were these openings that were actually, you see the windows and you see the doors. So there was a road. So I said to my husband, oh, let's take this quick turn up because I'm sort of curious to see what they look like. And it was one of these very sharp turns that you go up the hill, very narrow little street. And sure enough, we drove up and there were these houses that were clearly still inhabited that were carved into the cliffs.
Wow.
And you have this view of the river that is spectacular.
The view would be nice, but I don't want one.
So what happened was we drove all the way up and we come to this little chapel and we discover that we are in the middle of endless grapevines on these rolling hills. It is absolutely gorgeous.
Right. So take the side roads.
Take the side roads if you have the time.
Yeah.
And then from there, after taking some photos and looking down and going, oops, I don't know if I would like to live up here because it really makes my head turn a little bit.
Yeah.
But it was really quite impressive. And all of these people seemed to think it was very cool to do. We took the back roads and went to the village and the abbey of Fontevraud.
Oh, yes. I went to that before I got the puppy.
Before you got the puppy. And
yes.
So I hadn't thought about it much until we got to Saumur, but it was at Saumur when we saw the signs pointing to the Abbey of Fontevraud.
And you were like, oh, I recognize that
and
name.
I went, I have always wanted to go there. So to explain why, one of my heroines in history is Eleanor of Aquitaine.
Yes.
Who is or was buried at this abbey. In Fontevraud, which is part of the huge, huge domain that was hers as the Duchess of Aquitaine, which included the whole region of Anjou. And this was where she was buried and where she went the very last period of her life, which was a very long life. And of course, if you don't know the story of Eleanor of Aquitaine, she was this incredible woman who wound up being both Queen of France and Queen of England, and who mothered, I guess you can say that, many, many kings and
gave
queens.
Birth?
She gave birth to. She had 8 children.
Yes.
And was an incredibly interesting independent, intellectual woman who was just one of my heroines.
Yes, and her language
was
Occitan.
Occitan.
So she grew up speaking the local language of Toulouse.
Yes.
Oc,
language of Oc.
L'Occitan.
But she, of course, knew how to speak French because she was a very, very, very well-educated young woman who inherited the domain from her father. And at the end of her life, and she lived a long life. I don't remember exactly, but I think she was 76 when she died, which for those days, and we're talking 12th century, was really...
Yeah,
she died in 1204, I believe. She was an old lady.
Yeah.
And she left England, where she had been living as the wife of the king. Actually, she left a few years before that, but she went back to her lands, and this was where she was buried when she died.
Yeah, and it's an interesting abbey. I have some... I wish I had known you were going to talk about this because I would have looked at my pictures again.
Good pictures.
Yeah, I have lots of pictures. But I remember that there was this game. They were computers where you could draw and it would project what you were drawing on the wall?
No, there wasn't there this time.
Okay.
So I don't know.
Maybe it wasn't there or maybe they removed it.
Maybe they removed it.
It was fun.
But what was interesting is that the village, which is the village of Fontevraud, is in the middle of nowhere. It's literally, It's really in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's a very pretty little village. It's surrounded by rolling hills with grapevines, but boy, is it really in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, and it's pretty. It's really pretty countryside.
And it turns out now that it's a village that is fairly chic and
definitely.
is very, very. It has a music festival and it has artist residence there, and it's a very, very active cultural scene there. Mm-hmm. But the abbey. The history of it is absolutely fascinating. And it was founded as one of the very first abbeys where both men and women lived together. I mean, they didn't live in the same room, but they shared. Right. And it was run by a woman. It was run by an abbess. And it was one of the reasons why it was very much... it was really important to her, and it was one of the reasons why she chose to actually end her life there. So I went there because I'd read a few books about her, and I knew that she was buried there, and I'd never seen it before. And I have a couple of wonderful pictures of what is called the gisant, which is that's not the word in English. It's called it's a laying in state, but there's another official word for it. But it's a very gorgeous, beautiful sculpture that still has all the original color on it.
And it's hard to photograph.
It's hard to photograph.
It's indoors and you have to go high. And so my pictures, none of it had straight lines. Anyway.
I took them from the side. And of course, she's buried next to her
I don't know.
son.
Her son, okay.
Not her husband. She's buried next to her son, Richard the Lionhearted. But the gisant, so the sculpture, which is polychrome, and is very beautiful, and it shows her holding a book, which I think is wonderful.
Right.
Is the original from when she was buried in 1204, but her body is no longer there. And there was a young woman who was working as a as a guide there, and we were asking some questions, and it turns out that she and her daughter and her son their bodies were taken out and disappeared during the French Revolution. So the gisants are the originals. She was really buried there. The abbey itself is this incredibly impressive structure that has been mostly renovated. So it has a little bit of...
Oh, it's very nice.
It's very nice. It's huge, absolutely huge. The grounds are fabulous, too. It's just... The whole place is gorgeous.
Is it where they have the... so they have le réfectoire where they used to eat, and it's all color. You could see all the color.
The colors, yes.
Yeah. Oh, that was beautiful.
Very beautiful. And what they do now, because it is this whole village is a center of artistic activity, is that there's a contemporary artist who has some kind of an installation in the in the church. And so it was kind of interesting. It wasn't a horrible one. Even my husband said, "Oh, that's kind of interesting." It was
when I was there. It was lights.
It was lights. This was things that had to do with roseau. In fact, it had to do with some kind of very natural material. There's a gorgeous vegetable garden there. I mean, the whole place. We went there because I kept saying to him, he couldn't have cared less. I kept saying, I have to see where she's buried. I have to see where she's buried. And as it turns out, we spent hours there. It was really beautiful.
Yeah, you can spend a good 2 or 3 hours there. And that's why I never got to the chateau in Saumur, because I spent longer there than I thought I would. And then the Saumur was closed.
And it really is gorgeous there. I mean, it is, again, in the middle of nowhere. But it was really, I was so happy to have gone. I sort of paid my respects.
Yeah, and it's one of these stately kind of places. There's not a lot of furniture left inside, which is kind of too bad, I think. I wish they would bring in, even modern furniture, so we have an idea or reproduction of what they think it might have looked like. Because it's hard to imagine people living there if there's nothing, if the rooms are mostly empty. You're talking about
in the back, the rooms where the nuns and the monks would have lived.
Yes.
Well, but part of that has to do with the more modern history of it, which was really interesting because we bought a couple of books about it, and it was a prison. It was a prison until, believe it or not, the 1960s or 70s. And it was a prison where they actually did, they took the church, which is, of course, where she is, her statue is. Her gisant. And they built floors like they did here, the Jacobin for the horses. And they actually had layers going up of. It was infamous as a prison for a long time. And then it was used by the Germans in World War II. So it has a very interesting, very rich, and not always happy history.
Right, no,
but it's a fabulous place to stop and visit. It just is.
Yeah, I would recommend it.
It really is. And if you're really into being in a place like that, I mean, there are places to sleep, and there are certainly some nice restaurants and things like that as well.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure there. I didn't eat there. I remember parking illegally.
Yeah, that's not surprising to me.
and going in, and because I was trying to go fast, I was trying to see it fast, and then in the end, it grabbed me, and I spent longer than I thought I would.
It made my day. It was really one of those things. It's like I've always wanted to go and see her and pay my respects, and there we were.
But you are in the middle of nowhere. It's really a very peaceful kind of area with not a lot of. I mean, I didn't see anywhere they could park tour buses.
Oh, I don't know.
There might have some.
There might have been. But it was definitely a parking area. But I did not see tour buses. My guess is that. When we were there on a Sunday. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I mean, we were there in middle of August.
Yeah, I have a phobia with places that have big parking lots for tour buses. I'm like, oh no, run away.
Yeah,
run away.
You're right. We didn't see groups, so I don't know. I really don't know. But it was really lovely, and you're right. It's the whole thing, the whole area, this whole region, is very beautiful and basically very, very peaceful.
Yeah.
So we left Fontevraud, and we headed towards, as we were going towards our destination for the night, which was the city of Tours, which is for another time. But we headed back towards the river because this is south of the river. So you really go a bit away from the river, and we're not huge distances. And we went to the last village that I just wanted to talk about, talking about the river and this little bit of a drive, which is the village of Candes-Saint-Martin.
Okay, you're going to have to spell that.
Candes.
Candes-Saint-Martin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is the village that we were told we could not miss by a member of the family.
Dang it, I missed it.
And
I don't have family.
And because they lived in the area for years,
right.
This is part of the family that actually knew every village in the area, and it's considered to be it's on the list of one of the most beautiful villages of France. Was actually up for there's this special program with Stéphane Bern about every year they vote on the most beautiful village,
right?
And I was as we were heading towards there, I kept saying, "Oh, I wonder if this was ever blah 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 blah." But you see, I'm so intuitive; I knew it. And as I was looking it up yesterday, sure enough, in 2016,
it was.
It didn't win. It didn't win, but it was considered as a candidate. Yeah. Anyway, and it is on the point where the Loire is joined by the Vienne.
Okay.
And it is a village that is very, very, very important. And it's very important for two reasons. It's very important because of its history as a village along the river. Mm-hmm. And it's very, very important because it is where Martin de Tours was buried. And Martin de Tours is one of the most important early Christian bishops, extremely important in the history of the church, of the Catholic Church, of course, of Christianity. Mm-hmm. And Saint Martin. It's Saint Martin.
Okay.
This is Saint Martin. Saint Martin de Tours. And he built and was buried in the abbey that is there.
So there's an abbey in the village.
There's actually an abbey. Well, what's left of it is the church itself, which is really big for a very small village.
Right.
And then a few of the outer buildings, not the rest of the abbey structure. So we knew that we were going to make this our last stop before we just headed back straight to end spend the night in Tours, and had no idea what to expect. This is one of those deals where it was like, okay, we were told to go there. Let's go. We'll see what happens. And so personally, it was very interesting. It is very charming. It is not my vote for the most beautiful village in France, but there are so many beautiful villages in France that it wouldn't make any difference one way or the other. But it's fascinating. So
was it dead?
It was pretty dead.
There you go.
It was pretty dead. It was dead partly because we were there at the end of the day on a Sunday.
Right.
Because
in August, though.
In August.
Right. If you go at the end of the day on a Sunday in January, then it is truly dead.
It is truly dead.
Yes.
But so this is the deal about it. So first of all, it is it's mentioned for the first time in the 300s.
Oof.
It was a Roman site. It was actually a site that the Romans used to load and unload. So it's famous for having stretches along the banks of the Loire, which are it's of the southern side now, where they would load and unload these flat-bottom boats. Also because the Vienne, which is a river that, of course, comes from the Mouzin, from the Massif Central, empties there. So it was very important in terms of a commercial center, starting apparently even prior to the Romans. It was Celtic, even before that. It was really, really important. And then Saint Martin, Martin de Tours, if you will, if you don't want to call him Saint Martin, who is someone who truly, really lived a very long life, interestingly enough, all through the 300s. He was in the 4th century. He created this abbey there, and it became a site of a pilgrimage. He died in the year 397.
Okay.
He died in 397. He was buried there. And because he was responsible for Christianizing, he was a proselytizer. He had an incredibly interesting life, which I'll tell more about when we talk about Tours. But he had originally been a Roman soldier, and then he became a Christian, and he became an evangelizer. And he Christianized swaths of the whole area of the Loire Valley.
I don't understand how this happened. How did a single guy go and preach and convert all these people?
Well, it's another whole story.
Yeah,
Let's put it that. It's another whole story.
They were probably ready for it. Like they were waiting for something.
Yeah.
Or maybe there were swords involved.
Yeah, I think there was a little bit of both.
Okay.
I think there was a little bit of both. But what happened, sorry for that little bit of burst of sound that probably just popped out of me. But what happened was that because of the fact that he created this abbey there and then he was buried there, it became so important as a pilgrimage site that, believe it or not, into the Middle Ages, it was considered to be as important as Rome.
Woof.
That's how... This is this little village, okay?
Yeah.
This is a little village that now has just a few hundred people as permanent residents. But the other thing that makes this village really interesting is that, like these other villages that I mentioned earlier, it's very linear, right? Only this time we're on the southern banks of the Loire. And it's famous because not only does it have this history connected to Saint-Martin-de-Tours and the church that's there, which is really pretty amazing considering the size of the village. It has a part of the village that goes up high, so you have houses that are up high that can look down on the river. But it is famous for having this promenade that is a couple of kilometers that you can walk along the banks of the river with these gorgeous gardens.
Which is always very pleasant.
Which is
always
that would
very
be very
nice.
You know, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful gardens with flowers and everywhere. And so we walked a little bit of this. In the 19th and 20th century, it became a famous place, a little bit like some other villages we know about closer to here, for musicians and artists to go to. So they're associated with some of the houses in the village. And you take these paths that take you right down to the edge of the water, and you look out on the river. And so it has this very long, very rich history. But as you mentioned, it's not that big. It's bigger than it looked at first, because as we drove out to get back on the main road to head towards Tours,
you saw a few more houses.
Realized it's very, very long. I mean, it's filled with these gorgeous. It's got some very old houses. It's got some beautiful half-timbered houses made of limestone. Of course, this is just pure limestone area anyway. But it turns out that the village is really much longer than we thought. There's more to it than we expected, because we headed right for the center.
How long would this whole thing take you? Like, if you wanted to stop in these 4 places you mentioned, would you take the whole day?
Yeah. And of course, we had made up our minds ahead of time.
And then you went to Tours.
And then we went to Tours for the night.
Where you were staying.
Right. Which is where
so
we
you
were
could
staying.
do it from Tours towards
Absolutely.
Saumur, or vice versa.
Candice is pretty much halfway between Tours and Saumur.
What?
Candice or Saint-Martin.
Okay.
I don't know if you pronounce the S actually on the end of it. It is just about halfway between Tours and Saumur. So you can do it going east or going west. It really doesn't make any difference. It's also a site of, it's part of a large region that's part of a national park. It's famous for its birds and for all kinds of stuff like that. So a lot of people go there to do hikes. A lot of people go there to do boating as well, because they still take people out on the boats and things like that. And of course, it's, again, like these other villages, has troglodyte houses higher up in the cliffs. But if you could start from Tours, and you can do these. Of course, you can get to Tours easily from Paris by train. But if you're going to do these, you need a car.
Oh, sure.
This is unless you're doing a bike tour, you know.
Right. If you're doing it on a bike, that's one thing.
This is a car trip, you know.
Right.
I mean, this is.
It is a scenic drive.
It's a scenic drive. It's a gorgeous scenic drive.
Right.
And you can basically do. You can get to Tours, do a few of these, and then go back to Tours. But we did it, you know, just by starting in Angers and then going east, and then, of course, finishing. To be honest, you know, we took so much time at Fontevraud that by the time we got to Tours, it was like 9 o'clock at night.
Right.
And then it was a whole
right. So yeah, there are probably other places between Angers and Tours that would be worth a stop.
Right.
But these are just the ones you picked.
Exactly.
And you know,
right. They're typical. I mean, this region is famous for how everything's pretty much taken care of, and everything is very beautiful. And it was very bucolic. At the same time, it was very beautiful because of how old everything was. Everything's well taken care of. And as you mentioned, we stopped in these 4 places, and there are others you can stop in as well. But it's a lovely thing to do.
Yeah.
It's just a great thing to do.
Awesome.
Scenic drive along the Loire. And I'm not even talking about what comes east of Tours, because then you could continue on the levee, on the road, east of Tours, and just for those who might want to try to combine this with a visit to some of the famous chateaux, from Angers on, you have all the famous chateaux of the Loire Valley.
Yeah.
From one end to the other.
Yeah.
And you just go off the main road and you find them.
There are so many.
There are so many.
Yes. One of these days, I will see most of them, but not yet.
Not yet. No.
Well, if I keep going just to pick up a puppy, that kind of takes over your life.
That would be lots of puppies, though. Lots of puppies. Anyway.
Thank you so much, Elyse. That was really interesting. And next time I go, I will definitely make sure to go see those villages that I missed.
They are just lovely. And it's such a nice, somewhat different from some of the other places I've been seeing a lot of lately.
And then very soon we'll do another episode about Tours. Which is also another very interesting town.
Which is a very interesting city. Very lovely old city.
Merci beaucoup, Elyse.
De rien, Annie.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Thank you, Dana Bradford, for pledging to support the show on Patreon this week. Patrons enjoy several rewards, including membership into a secret Facebook group where I answer questions. They can also hire me to be their trip consultant and help them work out tricky details that they would like some help with. Visit patreon.com/join us. That's Patreon, join us. No spaces or dashes, to see the different reward tiers. And thank you so much for giving back, patrons. My thanks also to Lynn Verger and John Rybar maybe? Sorry, John, for sending in a one-time donation by using the green button on any page on joinusinfrance.com that says, tip your guide. And I have sent you both an invite to the secret Facebook group. And if you'd like to support the show without spending a penny you wouldn't have spent otherwise, before you go shopping on Amazon, go to the bottom of any page on joinusinfrance.com and click on the Amazon ad. Because you came to the Amazon through Join Us in France, no matter what you buy, I get a small commission, and it doesn't cost you a penny more. But you have to do it every time you go buy something on Amazon. It's a bit of a pain, but hey, it helps, And it's the same thing with booking.com. There's an ad for that too. And that one is obviously for hotel rooms. Thank you so much for pitching in. There is a new review of my Montmartre voice map tour that I want to share with you. I like the fact that this person describes what's going to happen to you if you get on one of my tours. I don't know this person, by the way, at all. Don't know if it's a he or a she. So let's say it's a she. I don't know. I have taken several guided walks tours of Montmartre while in Paris, but Annie's voice map audio tour is truly superior. She takes you to all the famous sites and more in an easy to follow route that you can take at your own pace. You can go inside museums and churches or stop and shop and get a bite to eat along the way without being held up by a big tour group. Her detailed information about the landmarks and legends of Montmartre goes beyond what you get on a usual walking tour. I would highly recommend this audio tour to anyone visiting Montmartre. Thank you so much. That's really nice. And yes, I do try to tell you as much as possible. And in a way, it's an advantage that I'm not there in person, because when you do a tour in person, which I've done too, you have to catch people's attention and keep people's attention. Well, if you're listening to me in your headphones, well, I'm in your head. And so you are paying attention. That's just human nature. So those are very fun. And I do think that you go into more depth and more detail with these voice map self-guided audio tours. And don't forget that podcast listeners get a discount if they purchase through joinusinfrance.com/audio tours. You may have noticed that I'm making a big push for podcast listening on all my social media channels the last few days. I want to attract more podcast listeners and not general travel people, because they ask really basic questions and they make me feel like I'm in a, they make me feel like I'm the hamster on the wheel, like the hamster wheel. I'm always trying to answer the same questions, and they certainly come at a fast pace. But you know what? I answer these questions on the podcast. That's what I do. I don't do it on Facebook. I do it on the podcast. But I should stop complaining, because I'm the idiot here, because I'm the one who's been letting them into the Facebook group too easily. So I'm not going to kick anybody out of the group, but I have tightened the requirements to join the group. Pretty much, if a group member invites somebody, so if you're a group member and you want, I don't know, your spouse, your friend, whatever, to come in, invite them in and I will let them in. If somebody tells me, I listen to the podcast, of course I will let them in. If they say they are willing to try to listen to the podcast, I will let them in as well. But the others, the dilettantes who just want to be fed answers, always the same one constantly, no more. This means that the Join Us in France Facebook group will grow really slowly, I think. But I think that's better for all of us. More quality and less quantity. There are over 6,000 group members anyway already. So that's a lot of people. Other than that, nothing too exciting is happening in my life. October weather is still absolutely perfect. We haven't had any rain to speak of. Upper temperatures are in the, 25 degrees C kind of ranges. It's lovely here in the south of France. I don't think you can beat that, actually. And another nice thing is that I'm going to a jazz concert tonight with Elyse in Toulouse. So that'll be fun. That'll be our first concert together. How exciting. And this morning, as I walked my dogs, I walked right into a competition that I had never seen before. It's called a duathlon in French, duathlon, which I think you say biathlon in English. It's like a 6K foot race plus a 21K bike race plus a 2.7K sprint. I got there by the end. I just saw the stragglers, but what was surprising to me is that it was couples competing together. They all ran in pairs. Anyway, I'd never seen that before. It was cool. New thing. So thank you for listening to this episode. Thank you for telling someone that they should listen to the podcast by searching for Join Us in France Travel Podcast. And you guys are my only marketing team. So thank you for trying to do that for me. Send questions or feedback to Annie@joinusinfrance.com. Have a great week of trip planning, and I will talk to you next week. Au revoir. The Join Us in France Travel Podcast is written and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2019 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.